So I was recently in a class with LT Wright Knives crew, and the topic of bushcraft came up, and we got a good discussion. And Mikey from LTWK said to me, "Hey, why don't you put that in a video or write something up for me?" So I wrote something up and put together this video. For those that I've not had the opportunity to meet, I'm Craig Cottrell, director of Nature Reliance School. I teach a lot of topics in the outdoors and write books and consult with a lot of different organizations and government agencies. I teach survival, man tracking, bushcrafting, obviously, nature immersion, and land navigation. So our approach to, well, at least my approach to nearly everything is what I call the 4 puzzle pieces of self-reliance and or survival: mindset, skills, teamwork, and gear. I want to apply those puzzle pieces to us here at Bushcraft to see where I think there's some holes in bushcrafting here in the United States. Now, part of this discussion came after an interview I did with Paul Kirtley from England, and then he interviewed me for his podcast, and we both got in the discussion about what is bushcraft. Number one, I'd highly recommend you go listen to both of those because it's his perspective and my perspective, and there's a lot of intermingling there that's worthy of note. But from a mindset perspective, I think the first thing we need to address is that we need to get back to a better understanding of the outdoors. And that doesn't have to be some severe academic understanding, but it does require us to do things like know how to use a dichotomous key, know how to understand and identify mad buck. If you don't know what that is, you should. And it's interesting to be able to identify any species of tree in the world so that you can efficiently harvest materials in the outdoors. I mean, I say it all the time, but why wouldn't you know how to identify a dogwood versus I don't know, something like a tulip poplar? Because if a dogwood's going to have a very strong modulus of rupture, which means it's going to be very difficult for it to break, and it's great for a bushcraft hammer, whereas the tulip poplar is going to fall apart if you make a hammer out of it. So we need to get back to that. We need to understand that identifying tree species is important. Skills, without a doubt. Skills is a huge part of the 4 puzzle pieces of self-reliance. Get out and practice your skills. We refer to it as in the difference between practice and training. Get out with your knife, whether that's a Shaman East designed by me, built by LT Wright Knives, the Companion that's coming out soon, the Genesis Bushcrafter HC, any of the different blades that LT Wright Knives offer are going to be fantastic choices. We just had a class here in Kentucky where we had pretty much one of everything that LT Wright builds, and we used every one of them at different times in our bushcraft class. So get out and use your knives, get out and use your axes, get out and use your saws, find out what works, because that's practice. And then training is where you put yourself under simulated stress. That's not the most appropriate place for what I would consider a level 1 course, but without a doubt, getting into more advanced where you live off the land sort of mindset in a bushcrafting scenario is worthy of your practice. And that takes it into the realm of training where you're now under this simulated stress and it's more difficult, and then you still get done what needs to get done. Teamwork. This is the third piece of the 4 puzzle pieces of self-reliance. Teamwork, working with other people, as well as working with the environment and stewarding it. I cannot say this enough. I think this is the major piece that's missing for most bushcraft here in the United States. And then after talking with Paul Kirtley, after interviewing Morris Kahansky about 4 or 5 years ago, we all agreed that that's a huge part that's just not being done. I've heard of schools and different teachers that go in and visit other places and leave those places like a moonscape when they leave. And that's ridiculous. If we want bushcrafting, survival, self-reliant skills to live, we've got to do what we can to help other generations get there. Number 1, that's teaching other people. And number 2, that's stewarding the environment. So I like to approach it from this perspective. It's not that I need a hammer and then I go cut something down and make a hammer. It's that I know that I need a hammer somewhere down the line, so I'm constantly looking as I go into the outdoors for opportunities to harvest a hammer that actually stewards the land. And I say this often, but one of the best times to do this is right after a storm. So go into an area right after there's been high winds or tornado, find where other trees have knocked down a dogwood, for example, and then harvest that dogwood that's been injured or dying. That way you don't remove a dogwood from the environment that doesn't need to be removed. And also this includes studying your trees and knowing the signs of a tree when it's in the process of dying, because it'll still put out leaves even though it's dying. And if you got two trees and one of them's vibrant and very alive and one of them's in the process of dying, taking the one that's in the process of dying might be something that would actually steward and help the environment. And then gear, obviously, knives, axes, and saws. Knives, axes, and saws is where it's at in bushcraft. So the more that we can get out with our tools, the more we use them, the more we become familiar with them, the better off we are. And it's one of those reasons that I've come to appreciate the quality of what comes out of LT Wright knives, simply because I use my tools a lot, particularly when I was writing the book, Traditional Bushcraft. When I was writing that book, I was working 6 to 8 hours a day doing bushcrafting for literally for months. Not every day, but for months I did that. And so sharpening my tools, taking care of them, taking care of myself so that I wasn't injuring myself. I never cut myself once. Working 6 to 8 hours a day with knives, axes, and saws, because not only was my gear well taken care of, I could use it properly. It was sharpened, it was oiled, everything was in top-notch condition so that it would function the way it was intended to function. And when it comes time to sharpen a knife, you come to appreciate the quality of, let's say, for example, LT Wright knives and what comes out of the shop, because it's difficult to get it to that type of quality and to that sharpness as it is when it comes out of the shop. So I think learning the skill of knife sharpening and knife maintenance and axes and saws and all that goes along with it, that's the gear component of mindset, skills, teamwork, and gear. So let's look to be opportunistic in finding our materials in the environment, and let's steward it so that we can teach other generations what it is that we love to do. We can take care of the environment so it's here for us to be able to share it with them and continue on these skills, continue on these traditions that we call self-reliance and bushcraft. Come on, join in. Let's learn together.